And just like last week, if you have questions that come up, feel free to type them in the chat. And then at the end, we can unmute ourselves, ask any questions, and we'll get those other questions from the chat answered as well. So go ahead and take it away.
All right. Well, thank you all for joining us on this Tuesday evening. And we're going to talk about some doom and gloom tonight. All the ways that your trees are going to keel over dead, and maybe how to help them. Kara's here tonight. You remember us from the last time. We're going to quick learn some signs and some symptoms to look for. We're going to specifically look at stuff that goes wrong with your trees up here in Douglas and Bayfield County. So a lot of tree pests, a lot of tree diseases. They're sort of regional. So we're not going to teach you ones that happen in Missouri. We're going to teach you ones that happen up here where you own property. And we're going to look at some management options and who to contact about these forest health issues. And so with that, I turn it over to Kara.
Hello. So the big question that I usually get is, how do I make my forest healthy? And I usually give a real roundabout answer, because what is a healthy forest is really connected with your objectives and to the degree you want to follow a different successional pathway. But we can put some sideboards on that. My definition of a healthy forest is a forest that has a good degree of native plants, both trees, shrubs, and like small flowering bits and everything in between. Then, how is that all spaced together in between the tree trunk space, and as well as the structure? I'm making motions to show you vertical structure of a forest.
Whoops.
To have a shrub layer, to have, is that better, guys? So to have a shrub layer, to have a large overstory, and to possibly have a seedling layer when that's appropriate. And what are your management objectives? Do you want a beautiful monoculture red pine stand? Some people do, and that's a great management objective. Other people want something that's more diverse, red pine, white pine mixed, pockets of that with some hardwoods in between. The big question is, what happens to your property if a disease sweeps through, if you have storm damage? A healthy forest can withstand that, or you can take some management options to improve it. Next slide. So these just fly through these, Andy. I just took some snapshots. Northern hardwoods, does that look healthy? Thumbs up, thumbs down. Who knows? Put your hands in the middle. I'm watching your videos.
Oh, we got a thumbs up there.
And then we got some folks who, let me see. Oh, a lot of people without video. So that, in some cases, could be considered healthy. Some people would not consider it healthy because that's a layer of Pennsylvania sedge. Is that grass? But we do see some pole-sized timber. Different objectives. I would say there's some questions there. Next slide. But could be healthy.
We got one question in the chat.
Sure.
From Anna Olson. It says, I'm in West Central Wisconsin in Trempealeau County. Will this still be applicable to me?
I believe so. Andy, yes?
Yeah. Yep. So there's some extra, as you get more temperate, there's actually some more pests down there that we're not going to cover tonight. Things like heterobasidian root rot. But yep, most of these things we're going to talk about tonight are also down there.
Thank you.
And there's another shot of northern hardwoods. Maybe it's healthy, maybe it's not. Next slide. Oh, you controlling it, Andy?
There we go. Yep, eventually.
Thanks.
Here we go.
Another shot of northern hardwoods. All of these are starting to look rather different. And my point is, sometimes at a glance, you don't know. You actually need to be able to identify your trees, their age structure, and all of the shrubs and small plants to actually know if you have a forest that's healthy in your mind and in my mind. Next slide. Yet another northern hardwood stand. And the secret to this one is I believe that's actually a Eurasian honeysuckle understory, but without getting close, I don't know if it actually is. We got to look closer at everything. Next slide.
Oops.
Here's another trick. We obviously know those pines are really unhappy, but is that just one small downburst that's only a little tiny piece and you could easily salvage it? Maybe you could leave some of it on the ground and maybe it wouldn't attract beetles. We have to know what that whole landscape is to see if that is actually a problem for your whole forest stand in the landscape, or if those are just a few unhealthy red pine. Next picture.
After the last tornado last year up there.
Yeah, I actually almost included a picture of this pickup stick pile of red pine I had up in northern Bayfield County last year. And you'll go more into that storm damage stuff. So this to me, before I was a forester, looked like a nightmare and a half, but that may be a healthy aspen coppice. We would just have to wait and find out. Next slide. Maybe in 15 years, that aspen coppice would start looking like that, which again, before I was a forester, looks like a boring monoculture, which seems like it could be bad. But after that coppice or clear cut, aspen regenerates really, really well. If that's part of your objectives, good. If it's not, then we can do some different things. Next slide. So when we're thinking about preparing a healthy forest, most of your actions have to be large scale. Sometimes you can protect an individual tree, but we don't have time to go out and hug every single tree and protect it, remove all of the beetles from each leaf every day and tend it like a square foot garden. So you have to make big actions like thinning it to promote the vigor of the strongest trees. And the rotation age, that's a fancy way of saying, is it time to start over on this stand? That usually means to do a clear cut / coppice or another major regeneration harvest. And then species selection. You can actually have a forest that was pushed through management in the past to not have the species that are most appropriate for the site. And another thing that's a little counterintuitive for some people is to leave some snags and some big giant down dead wood on the ground.
Kara, what's a snag?
What's a snag? It's a fabulous thing, Andy. A snag is a standing dead log. It's just a dead standing tree, useful for a lot of different wildlife. Thanks, Andy. And sometimes the best thing that can be done is eradication. Salvage what is left of a stand that's going downhill to remove basically insect and fungus snacks from the landscape. Next slide. So you think you may have a problem, or maybe you think you have a healthy forest. Please be able to tell me or show me pictures of which tree species you're looking at. What are you looking at? A sign or a symptom? A sign is the agent, the actual disease, a big fungal mat, the bug itself. And a symptom is what that tree is showing in response. Do you see wilting leaves? Do you see, leaf drop in a certain part of the crown? So please get a tree ID book, check online, and we are always ready to do walkthroughs. Next slide. So there's actually another iteration of what I just said. An interesting thing about this, and we'll reiterate it multiple times, look for multiple visual clues and multiple possible agents, because you can have a primary cause and a secondary cause. I myself have been guilty of this. You go up to a tree and I see those needles are falling, they're turning yellow. I look at the side of the bark of that pine tree and I see little insect holes. There it is, we've got an insect infestation. The thing is sick, whatever this beetle is has got to go. sometimes that beetle is an opportunistic pathogen. It's coming because that tree is already sick. So looking at the bole of the tree, looking at the needles, looking for fungal spores, and also digging around at the base of the tree and looking for more fungal mats, seeing if you can find multiple agents or multiple signs. Next slide. There's more examples of what those are. One of my favorites is on the right side, that tree that looks like it's trying to become a bush on the sides. Those are epicormic branches, and it's a last ditch effort of a tree to throw out some needles or leaves, I should say, to get a little more photosynthetic area because it's struggling. Most of those leaves aren't really that helpful. So when you see these things, be able to describe where on the tree they are. Like on the bottom, perhaps you could call that a shepherd's crook tip on your pine tree, or whatever that might be. So describe where on the tree, take as many pictures as possible. Next. And there's more examples of why it matters the location. So dead leaves in the lower canopy, sometimes that can be a fungal infection. Whereas if it's on the top, perhaps there's damage to the roots. And notice it also says a fungal wilt. So you can have fungus impacting the vascular tissue of the tree and clogging it up, kind of like a tree heart attack. Or you can have fungus that's born on the air and is taking advantage of the moist air that could be in maybe an overcrowded area that doesn't allow enough airflow through. Oh, next slide. And I think there was a question which I didn't quite see.
Yeah,
We can
oh, go ahead. You
No,
saw
you
it.
got
Just
it.
want to make sure you got it. Go ahead.
Sibley's Guide to Trees is one that I use. The apps I have not gotten into yet, like iNaturalist. I've heard it's good. I've also heard that it can send you down a rabbit hole. And then there is a Forestry 101 book. And Lauren and Andy, you guys can say which book you recommend. I don't know if this is showing me. So this is a publication the DNR puts out. It's thick and the winter could be really long and you could get through it all, I hope. So Wisconsin Forest Management Guidelines. It's got everything in it. But there are probably some shorter publications if Andy and Lauren can think of some.
You know, any of the, you know, those sort of pocket or field guides, if you look and they've got pretty good reviews. The only thing I'd say is kind of watch that they're for your area where your land is. You know, you can get a regional one, which is going to have a lot more detail than if you get, you know, Trees of America. So, you know, if you can get Trees of the Midwest or Trees of the Eastern Seaboard or whatever, but as long as they've got good reviews, you can kind of start from there. You know, lots of color pictures to help you. Some of them get really into the weeds and they're starting to you know, look at the winter bud shapes and this and that. That's probably more than you need for now. So leaves, bark, and the range of where you find them, that'll get you down the right path.
Thanks, Andy. And we're getting closer to Andy's part of the presentation. And you should know, oh, I'm sorry, the DNR phone. The location of the symptom in your forest. Is it affecting a pocket of trees or a smattering of trees all over? And I didn't know this till I was a forester. Cool thing, many trees, and you all probably know this, have roots that graft together, or they have helpful fungus that will move nutrients across multiple trees' roots and kind of share for them. But unfortunately, when you're sharing drinks and nutrients, you tend to share diseases. So you can see a disease work its way out through grafted roots and fungus. And there's another example. Is it a fungal infection or is it bark beetle? How is it all working? Next slide. As many observations as you make are great. And here's another page of those causal agents. But remember, you could see these insect tunnels far after the original pest has started to impact the tree. And I see a lot of exit holes, even on healthy trees. But you will find out later, the shape of those galleries, the shape of those exit holes, they can indicate who's at home and who's causing you a problem. Next slide. And this is our list of main problems that we have in this area. There's always more. And Andy, you can take it from here.
Yep. All right. Thanks. Yep. These are some of the specific ones we're going to talk about here in the upcoming slides with some pictures. So pretty common things to have up here in the north. We'll start with oak wilt. So oak wilt is pretty new up here to northern Wisconsin. It's old hat if you're down in the south. This is just a whole bunch of pictures. If you look, and we've got a better picture of the leaves, but that center picture here, if we're able to see my mouse, you see those leaves starting to wilt, and you see that sort of leaf bronzing, and it happens pretty quick. From when you first notice that something's kind of wonky with that tree until it's dead, it could be as quick as 2 weeks. This is the perfect time of year to start spotting it. In fact, I've got one that's just 3 miles down the road that have just popped up that somebody called me about. So this oak wilt, we're going to go into a little bit more. You're going to see that this is your symptom. You're going to see that leaf canopy when everything else is green in the middle of summer, and all of a sudden you're going to see the leaves starting to turn bronze from the outside in, from the outside of the tree in, and it's just going to start to look a little bit like early fall, except too fast. On this lower left, this is just a fungal mat. So after the tree is dead, this is one of the reasons why we ask you to chop up that wood and bury it, burn it, use it before the next spring. This fungal mat forms under the bark. Now we scraped our way here to show you. And what happens is it ruptures in the spring and it releases all these spores. So that's one way we get spread. So what is this oak wilt? So it's caused by a fungus. I can't say that. Brettzelia something. I put the name in there just so you can see it's caused by a fungus. The fungus, it gets into the water conducting system, like Kara was saying, right? So it prevents them from passing water up and down, causes the tree to wilt and die. So it kind of looks like the tree's going through drought, right? The oak wilt is introduced into the area on the feet of these little bugs, right? These little beetles. And just like a bumblebee is carrying pollen from one flower to another on its feet, this sap feeding beetle isn't really that harmful to the tree, but it's carrying that fungus along. And so you get a fresh wound, you prune a branch, you hit it with the lawnmower. We were doing some logging, somebody was brush hogging, whatever. And then these sap feeding beetles, they can smell that fresh tree wound for a couple of miles, and they'll just fly on over like moths to the flame, beetles to the sap, and they've got the dirty stuff on their feet. So some of you may have heard that we've got oak wilt seasonal restrictions. We're going to talk about that in a second. And those are actually based on the life cycle of the beetles. So when the beetles are active, when they're up and flying around, they're going to carry it around. And that's what we use to determine these seasonal restrictions on oak wilt. So here's a much better picture of the leaves, right? So starting from left to right. So they're going to go from that dark green July color they should have, and they're going to start browning out. It says sometimes they'll look a little water soaked there. And it's just going to march right down the leaf until the whole thing is kind of bronzed out. So you see the leaf doesn't look like it's actually wilted up. It doesn't look curled up. It doesn't look eaten. It just fades out. It just browns out because it's basically dehydrating. So here we go with some oak wilt prevention. This is from just this spring. And so you can see that in most of the counties in the state, they're red already. Oak wilt is well established. Up here in the north, it's still pretty new to us. You can see in Bayfield County, we've got Cable and Namakagon, and then we've got Barnes and Drummond townships a little further up there. Over here in Douglas, we've got, I think that's Gordon, and I'm not sure which one that is, and Dairyland over here. So we've got it already in the area, which means that those fungus spores are ready to be spread by the bugs. So it's not gonna be long until we're red up here as well. So the oak wilt prevention, we were talking about seasonal restrictions. up here in the north, and the line runs pretty much right along like this. If you're able to see the mouse, it kind of runs across through Polk and Barron and Rusk and Taylor and Marathon all the way over towards Green Bay, and then runs right down the coast. Don't thin or cut your oaks or wound your oaks or maim your oaks or otherwise antagonize them from tax day all the way until the middle of July. And that's just based on when the bugs are active. In the southern part of the state, we start a little earlier, it warms up a little quicker, the bugs are flying around a little earlier. But so if you generally remember April, May, June, July, that's not the time to prune your oaks. That's not the time to take one out of the yard or do whatever. You know, generally the best time is to do it over the winter, but this is the area. And in fact, some counties have even made ordinances on what you're allowed to or not allowed to do with an oak during these oak wilt guidelines. We as the DNR, we don't allow any logging in an oak stand that we're managing during those times as well. And then don't move oak firewood. This is becoming kind of a mantra, right? Everybody's starting to know that you don't move firewood anywhere now, right? It's got to be within so many miles, or it's got to be kiln dried. Every time you go camping, you got to buy it locally, right? Instead of bringing it from home. So that's one of the reasons you could be moving oak firewood and you don't know it's got the spores underneath the bark there. So oak wilt management, there really isn't much. So there's some things that we try if we first catch it. And this is one of those reasons why it's important to get out there and walk in your woods, enjoy your woods, grab a cup of coffee or whatever it is, and get out there and see what's going on, ride around your trails. If we catch this when it's limited to a couple of trees, we can sort of try to slow the spread. If we don't catch it till it's already 4 or 5 acres, then that's just what you're gonna have. So in the picture on the right there, Kara mentioned root grafting. If we see a tree or 2 or 3 trees, you got the oak wilt and there's other oaks around them. It's expensive, but you can try something called root severing. So you bring in a machine, kind of like a ditch witch, and you're going to dig down 4 feet deep and just trench around so that you stopped. I'm talking with my hands again. You're going to trench around so that you're stopped passing that from the infected trees on outward. And you're going to go probably a good layer of actual still uninfected trees out and then root graft. Stump extraction, I guess if you've got like a onesie twosie, you've got one in your yard or something, it's not something we normally talk about. Hard to get it all out. Pretty common thing that we'll do is we'll herbicide that tree just to make sure that it's dead and not passing anything along. And then we'll also herbicide the ones right around it. So we're unfortunately killing live trees, but we're assuming that they're connected and they're going to get it too. And if we can kill them, you've kind of like cauterized the wound, if that makes sense. And so we'll girdle them, which means you're cutting a hole, not a hole, you're cutting a kind of a stripe all the way on the tree through the cambium, through that layer that moves the nutrients, and then you're putting some herbicide in there to kill it. And then stump treatments, if say a tree fell over on your house, it's not your immediate concern. You want to get the tree off your house, but now you got this oak stump and it's in the middle of time. You could treat the stump with herbicide. Like the bottom picture here, you could do wound paint. I don't know why the thought of a tree falling on your house was what I used for an example, but hopefully that's not the problem you got. But basically, it's all about limiting the spread. We can't prevent the bug from coming along, so the only thing we can do is try with the seasonal restrictions to deny them a reason to show up, right? There's no wound, then the bug doesn't show up with the little dirty spores on its feet. And then if it gets in the area, we try to slow the spread. So that's oak wilt. We all gasp for breath. Red pine pocket mortality. This is our next one. You can see it's caused by the fungus Leptographium. So for those of you who remember your college biology, there you go. County detections, you can see that it's all over. It is typically only found in red pine plantations. Not to say there couldn't be one, but that's where we find it. Pockets start with one or a couple dead trees, and then we got these things we call fader trees. So typically the way we find this is the forester is out working in your woods, and they come across 2 or 3 dead red pines, and they look up, and when they look up, those are dead, but the ones around them are fading, right? They're starting to not look very healthy. Their crown is losing needles. They're not looking like they're going to do much. And we go, uh-oh. And so this happens, it spreads out like waves in a pond through a plantation. Each year the pocket gets a little bigger. You get another ring or 2 of these dead trees, and your fader trees expand. I find this pretty often when I'm up here. Each year, like it says, the edge of the pocket expands. And again, it's something to do with the tree moving water, right? So the trees are infected, they're stressed because they can't take up and move the water like they can. Now they can't make all their defensive compounds. And then what happens, like Kara was mentioning, if it's not one thing, it's another, right? So the stressed trees attract the beetles, and then the beetles really get in there and they're what kill the tree. So the tree is already kind of, you know, it's choking, it can't get the water, it's struggling. And then along comes the beetle. A lot of these beetles and pests, they can actually sense a weak tree, just like the lion can sense the weak gazelle in the herd, right? So the bark beetles are finally what's going to kill this tree, but it's because of that fungus in the first place. And I guess, well, we're going to talk about it here in a second. So bark beetles, as we segue in, and there's a nice picture of some galleries, those tubes that they cut. If any of you have ever cut down an old dead elm, you've probably seen a ton of these underneath the bark all over the place. On the left, we've got a picture of some bark beetles. If you guys have been out west, you've seen areas that are just killed. That's what's causing a lot of the fuel loading for these wildfires, is we've got these bark beetle infestations, and we're getting hundreds and thousands of acres where 80% of the trees are standing dead conifers that are dried out because it's an arid condition, right? So they get into an area, they go kind of bananas. You can see on the left, you see all these little kind of BB holes. Some exit holes are round, some are the shape of the letter D. And we use that just kind of to figure out which beetle we think it was. But you'll see these little holes, and if you've got some pines, especially some red pines up here in the north, and you go look, you're going to see some on every tree. Not a big cause when there's only a couple. So these bark beetles, they can sense a tree that's stressed, and it can be stressed for dozens of reasons. Like it says there, overcrowding is a very common one. You know, you've got a pine stand and it's never been thinned, so it's got 900 trees to the acre, and they're all, you know, it's 70 years old, but they're all 6 inches in diameter and 75 feet tall. And you think, well, I'm growing utility poles. But really those trees are stressed, they're overcrowded. I kind of explained to the landowners, like, if you've got a garden and you plant sweet corn and you planted a seed every half an inch all the way down, when they sprouted, as they started growing, they'd be fighting with each other, right? And you'd have to go and pull some out of there. You'd never get big, tall plants, and you'd never have any ears on your corn, right? So it's the same thing if we don't pull some of those trees out of there, if they're too thick, like in a human planted plantation, we plant them thick in case we lose a few. We got to go in and thin it. Drought we're having right now stresses trees. Flood. Some of you guys have been up here and you've seen all the dead trees around the lakes, because the lakes have come up 6 or 8 feet in the last couple of years. You know, and so you see a ring of dead birch or whatever. You know, a disease like we're talking about, the leptographium. Here we go, changes the water table again. Wounds, you know, a fire. Storm damage is a really common one. It's one we worry about up here. We had a big blowdown in the northeast part of the state a couple years ago, and again down in like the Barron County, Rusk County area. You get all that wood, all that damaged trees and wood laying on the ground, that invites the bark beetles in. So we say stressed trees are more vulnerable. Why? So a tree, a healthy conifer, can normally make enough pitch to push a bark beetle right back out the hole it chewed in, right? It'll just eject it. It's pretty sweet. So if that tree is healthy, it's got a healthy crown, it's got healthy roots, it's doing its tree thing, and a few beetles come along, they'll push them right out. You'll even see them sometimes in a little resin pocket. You'll see a little resin, I don't know what else to say, a little resin booger on the side of the tree. And if you look in there, there might be a beetle. So they can do that, but when they're stressed, they can't do that as well, right? Just like when we're not healthy, it's easier for us to get sick with something else. So their defensive mechanisms are compromised. However, and this happens out west, and a large bark beetle population can even mass attack and overwhelm healthy trees, right? So once you've got too many of these stressed trees and you get a super huge generation of bark beetles, well, then the next year they move on and now they're in mass, you know, it's the invading army. And so they can still overwhelm healthy trees. But in general, a healthy conifer can resist a small amount of bark beetles. So how do we manage for these little guys, right? So one of the things we were sort of alluding to is when you've got that blowdown, right? You've got 200 trees an acre that are flopped over laying on their side. promptly salvaging those trees. You know, everybody's already upset. You know, you had a woods and now you've got a not woods. But it's important to get in there. You know, you're not going to get a lot of money for it a lot of times. It's, you can imagine if you've ever walked in a blowdown, how they're tangled like matchsticks if you threw them on the floor. And so you can imagine how the logger has to try to pick them out and untangle them. Takes them forever, but they will come in and take it. And the reason to get them out of there isn't really financial. It's so that you don't have this bark beetle infestation in the area. Up here in the north, we have restrictions on how long you can leave wood. So that pile of logs on the right, we call that a log deck. And we say the logs are decked, or the timber is decked up. So it's just been harvested. Now it's waiting for the trucks to all come and take it off to the mill, right? We don't let the loggers leave that wood like that for longer than 3 weeks during the months of March through August up here, because you can see that's just a bark beetle smorgasbord. They don't have to work very hard to find all the food they want there, right? And then, like we mentioned, thinning stands at the proper time so those trees stay healthy. You know, sometimes it seems like, well, I'm hurting the stand if I'm going in and cutting, but if they're too tight, it can bring a whole host. And we're going to talk about some more bugs as those trees get stressed. Moving on to the next doom and gloom here. So emerald ash borer. If you live down south, you've already seen it. There are, if you go between Madison and Milwaukee, you can see down in the lowlands, you know, 100 acres at a time where the trees are all dead. The sad part is ash is a beautiful tree. It's a valuable tree and a useful tree, and we're going to lose them. So you can see in the center, Kara was talking about apicormic branching. That tree is struggling. It's fighting. It's giving its last little kicks, but that thing is probably doomed. They come in, they kill the tree. They leave these D-shaped little exit holes. And we'll go on here. Here's what they look like. They're pretty tiny. So did I see a couple of questions pop up? Okay. They're pretty tiny. You know, you can see there's a penny for scale. They're not very wide. They're pretty short. The larval stage is, I guess, you know, if you found them, what you're going to find is adults. And if you drive around up here in the north, you'll sometimes see these great big purple kind of, I don't know what the geometric shape is. They're a triangle, but it's in 3 dimensions. They're stretched out, and they're about 2.5, 3 feet long, and they're hanging as high in the tree as I can get them hung. And those are just sticky traps, and we catch every manner of bug that flies up here. But we're looking for these little green guys, these iridescent green bark beetles. They do look kind of like a bronze birch borer, but if you do find some of these, it's perfectly acceptable to get a couple of them in a little tube or something and call a forester and see. So that's what they look like. There's an example that used to be an ash forest, and they just kill it. What's left in their green is probably some of their species. And so it's attacking everything that's kind of greater than 2 inches in diameter. And it only takes it a couple of years. And unfortunately, because we've had a few years now that we know this is coming, it can be pretty hard to interest somebody in coming and harvesting the ash off your property in advance, because we've sort of flooded the market with ash because everybody's thinking the same thing. But here we are. So we've been modeling this. It's we've had a few years to look at it, and it looks like in a healthy forest, you're going to lose 98% of the ash trees out of that stand. And of course, in an unhealthy forest, much more. Most of our upland forests, the ash is a smaller component. We find it in a hardwood forest, and it you know, we get white ash in the uplands, green and black ash in the bottomlands. In the uplands, you may not really notice. There'll just be a few dead trees, unless you happen to have a lot of ash. In our lowlands up here in the north, a lot of that is black ash, and so you're going to see, just like that last picture, big swaths of dead trees. On the upside, ash is great firewood, but please don't move it, you know, all over the state and help it spread. You know, we've got a map coming up here that shows where we've found it. Excuse me. And we used to have a quarantine county by county. Now we've sort of gone to a state quarantine just because it's gotten away from us. But it happens when people move firewood. It came here, we think, from Asia in pallets, like shipping pallets. And so those bugs are just doing their inactive stage in there, and then they wake up in a new spot and there's new food. Some of you may have heard about, pardon me, I gotta have a sip of water here. Some of you may have heard that there's treatments, and there are, but there's sort of on a one tree at a time basis. Like if you have a beautiful ash tree in your yard and you have too much money, then you can hire an arborist to apply repeated treatments, and they're not cheap, over and over again, trying to save that ash tree. But in general, on a forest level, it's not practical. So here we got a map. We've got positive ID of these bugs. In other words, we found them on the traps in Douglas County and right on the border with Bayfield County. So these are, as I recall, Highland, Gordon, and Wascott townships right here. And you can see, you know, the bugs don't know that there's a county line there. That's just a township line. So they're over here. We just haven't caught one here yet. We've got them to the south. We got them to the southeast. We've got them all over to the west. So they're here. We also have positive ID now in Iron County since the map was made. So they're all around us. They're coming. It's sort of the march of doom. There's no real way around them. Moving on from that depressing topic, the two-line chestnut borer. Kara's going to take it away.
And after hearing about emerald ash borer and oak wilt, I hope you're excited if your oaks are declining and it's only the two-line chestnut borer. It's rather a beautiful insect, though destructive. And you probably could make a little bit of a mistake comparing it to oak wilt. The difference will be that these trees are not going to die within a matter of weeks. Infestation by two-line chestnut borer takes 2 or 3 years of heavy infestation to actually kill the tree. But like emerald ash borer, part of what it's doing is messing up that vascular tissue of the tree and starting to choke those leaves of water. And okay, so you found this on your property. What now? And the answer in forestry is almost always prevention. So it's in the stand. You could try to salvage what's there, but know that anytime you cut trees, there is a little bit of shock to the remaining, and you could potentially weaken even currently healthy trees, making them more susceptible to two-line chestnut borer. And these guys are good flyers, so you point out the few really heavily infested trees. They're probably already beyond that, and they will be moving from tree to tree. So trying to cut just the infested trees isn't going to be a very good method. And I'm going to answer a quick question. If you have a few ash trees, should you take them down? Will the ash borer affect other trees? Ash borer, I know we're skipping around, or emerald ash borer will only affect true ash trees. And then your choice of what to do with a few individual ash is very site dependent. You could do a systemic insecticide. Pro-con on that, you would inject the soil, like drench the soil around the tree with an insecticide that ash would take up, and you could protect the tree. But that's not necessarily a recommendation that everyone wants to go with, and it isn't effective for large numbers of trees. Andy, I'll let you talk about that more, either right now or later. Which would you like?
Sure. We'll do it. We'll talk about it now. So, yeah, if you've got just a few ash trees, you could take them down while they're live. If you were trying to, you know a buddy with a little sawmill or something. If you've only got a couple, you could leave them. It might be next year they succumb, or it could be 8 years from now. And a couple of standing dead trees on the property, wildlife habitat, as long as they're not drawing red turpentine beetles, right? But if they're ash trees, they're not drawing those in there. They're habitat, and the ash borer, once it's killed those couple of trees, it's not going to get into your maples or your oaks or your aspens or your birches, so it's going to move on. Or you can harvest them, while they're still alive, and they're kind of easier to deal with. I never recommend that people who aren't professionals try to cut down trees that have been standing dead for a couple of years, because all sorts of things try to fall on your head. So it definitely is safer from a landowner scale if you are going to take them down, to do them while they're still alive, or at least once they start to succumb and they're mostly alive, right? Kind of can let them stand there as long as you want. If you have a whole big pocket of them, enough to consider a timber sale, you could contact a forester and see if there's somebody in the area that is interested. You know, we do sell them, they still use them. Even the black ash sometimes goes off for like timber mats that you see utility companies use to cross the swamp to put up poles and stuff. So, but yeah, just a couple. You could leave them if you wanted to, especially if they're in a hard to get to spot. Does that answer the question, John? Okay.
Back to the excitement of two-line chestnut borer. So one of the symptoms is that the leaves in the upper crown will start to die. It's a good symptom of a tree that is being choked of water, and the trees will hang on to their leaves, similar to oak wilt in some ways, but the way that the tree dies will be much slower, and the look of the dying tree will be different. I have some notes here. Typically, the crown is attacked the first year, with the remaining portions of the tree attacked in the second and third years. Foliage in the upper crown wilts, turns brown, but remains attached to the branches. These branches will die and produce no foliage the next year. So maybe you'll have a big branch sticking out, looking entirely dead without any leaves. And again, stressed trees are more susceptible. And one of the causal factors of stress can be a failure to thin a stand that's becoming overcrowded, or environmental stress, maybe like our current lack of rain, long drought. And next slide. So there's more information, and like the emerald ash borer, those larval galleries are beginning to choke branches and leaves off from their water source. Next slide. This is one of my favorites, kind of. Spruce budworm. I feel like many of you probably have had at least some spruce budworm damage. It's also a bit of a misnomer because spruce budworm doesn't affect just spruce. It really loves balsam fir. And that's a great picture of what it looks like. Dead, awful looking tops. They turn gray. Next slide. And you see on the bottom left right there, there's that feeding on the branches. If you look at an individual branch, you'll see webbing on it. You'll see nibbled on needles. I've had some people say, oh, did a deer chew on these? But you'll notice the webbing, and it may not be entirely defoliated all at once, but those insects will be working on it. It is native, and there were big outbreaks in the 70s and 80s. There was a point in time when foresters thought, we could probably just drop an insecticide over the entire forest. And this did happen in the Northeast, I think in the late 60s and early 70s, and it worked great for a couple years. A giant forest-wide insecticide pushed down those spruce budworm numbers for a few years, but actually left just enough of a population to explode and eat all of the overabundance of food a few years later, making an even bigger outbreak. So that's why, rather than trying to apply forest-wide insecticides from the air, we recommend doing sanitation, thinning, and managing the stand through harvest. And you can see these outbreaks last a good long time, 10 to 15 years. And I have had multiple landowners and actually friends mention this. And even a friend of mine had their property salvage-ish logged after they experienced what's in the photo on the right, some like full tree death. A lot of the value was already gone, and what may have been more helpful would have been doing some sanitation cutting first. Next slide. So there it is, salvage and pre-salvage. If you're starting to get an infestation, it's probably time to just harvest it, because those insects are going to keep eating, or those the larvae, I should say. And the older the stand, the more susceptible, really. Younger stands aren't always commercially viable for harvest as well. So this is where it's important to have a forest management plan that shows you in what years it's projected to have a thin.
See what you did there? Stuck that in from the last lecture.
I'm very excited about forest management plans. And I'm just going to go back to this book, the Wisconsin Forest Management Guidelines, to actually read about the recommendations for your forest type. This is a really great book with lots of interesting pictures. It's not going to be a deep winter read. You can use it like a reference. Next slide. Oh, look at that. I'm recommending forestry work again. So back to ash. We know emerald ash borer is coming, and you need to evaluate your site for, like, John's question is, I have a few ash trees, what should I do? There could be, I have a pure black ash wetland, what do I do? Versus I have upland northern hardwood with X percentage of ash in it, what should I do? There's actually a lot of characteristics of your site that have to be considered when you figure out what to do about impending forest health issues. And look at that, maintain your woods in a healthy manner, thinning when appropriate, removal of storm damage, in parentheses, large amounts. One of my favorite phrases is a healthy forest has a healthy amount of disease and death. Not all dead trees, not all down dead wood, and not all disease is really a bad thing. A lot of these pests are native, and sometimes non-native pests create more down dead wood, which would be useful for a native species. For example, there are woodpeckers that create cavities in trees, maybe a bunch of ash, and then there are songbirds that nest exclusively in holes made by woodpeckers. That's really putting yourself in a small corner for habitat, but that's what some songbirds do. And I'm happy that Andy put in follow Oak Wilk's seasonal guidelines and get your neighbors in the game as well, and even your township's road and right-of-way maintenance crew. Because if you go down and sever every single stem 15 feet from the edge of the road in, June, that probably is going to attract those picnic beetles carrying oak wilt fungus all the way down your road. Next slide. Andy, did you want to do abiotic, or should I?
Sure, I can jump in and grab us some of these. So abiotic, that just means it's something that's not alive. It's not a bug, it's not a fungus. A lot of times, and that first bullet doesn't make a lot of sense till we see the pictures coming up here. Weather damage is a stressor, like we're already talking about. Wet years, flooding. So here we go into some pictures, and now it makes sense. The same species, the same damage across the big area. So you look at the left there, those trees, that's not a bug, that's just an overly hard winter. You can kind of see where the snow line was. They got frozen, it was too cold for them. This year we're seeing a lot of these little, like up on this conifer here, a lot of these little tips, some frost damage. And the same thing down here, your apple tree leafed out and it got a little ahead of itself, and then we had a frost and killed those early leaves. So it can be the cold, it can be hail. Hard to see what you're looking at here, but if you get squinty eyed at your screen, you'll see these little damages, these little pock marks. This was from some decent sized hail, and it just bangs into the tree, and of course it's damaging that nutrient carrying layer underneath, right? Or you got storm damage, like a big blowdown here. That's pretty obvious. And again, we're going to get in there and clean that up. because we could be causing ourselves a further issue. You know, you're all familiar with what snow and ice can do. This is some of that on the bottom left. There's some of that rise in the water table we were talking about. You know, if the water comes up for a week and leaves, it's usually not going to kill a tree. But you know, trees all have their own individual, species all have their own individual moisture preference. A black ash doesn't mind having its feet a little damp. You know, a jack pine hates it. So you know, if you've got some species growing up in here that weren't used to flooding, and then the water was high for a year, you're going to have some mortality. And even drought. Usually this is a stressor. We haven't had a multi-year sustained drought here in a long time, but it can be a stressor that brings on some other pest, right? Nothing you can do about the drought or usually the water. If you live in Wisconsin, you've seen the salt damage to especially conifers on the side of the road. You know, we've got salt so that we can all drive. Then you'll see that chlorosis on the side of the road sometimes. Not really a cure for it. You shouldn't see that in other areas. Then you got some more I guess these are biotic. You got little critters, right? They're down there chewing off the bark. That's why everybody wraps their little apple tree, right? So that they don't do this to the tree that you plant in your yard. The deer, you'll see them browsing the same level, usually about snow height. It's a good indicator of how much snow you had on your property. And so this tree is just trying and trying down here, putting out more and more stuff. And then you got the sapsuckers, pretty common bird up here. And we actually see them if you're lucky enough to have any hemlocks. You'll see whole rows of these back and forth on there. And that doesn't seem to bother the hemlock, but it's clearly given an issue to this birch here. Other causes, things that go on. Some of you might have experienced this. You go and you plant 100 red pine trees, and you have 100 dead little twigs a little while later. It could be you planted too shallow, too deep. The most common thing I think is this J rooting. Talking with my hands where you can't see me. So that long tap root gets bent at the bottom because the hole's not deep enough. And so now instead of going down like it should, it can't do what it's supposed to do, and it kills the little plant. And then down here on the bottom, kind of a holdover from the last one where I've jumped up and down on the table and said, please use a forester. That destructive cutting can be a big stressor, right? You know, your woods are a long-term investment, folks. You can't put it back once it's removed. That good timber is valuable. So, you know, unless it's all laying flopped over in your red pine plantation after a windstorm, don't rush into a harvest. You know, one of my favorite phrases to say is, let's not get in a rush. They'll be here next year, right? They're not going anywhere. If I don't cruise them or mark them or count them today, they're not going to pick up their skirts and run off and disappear. So take your time, do it right. And help is available. So you go to your favorite website, dnr.wisconsin.gov. You can do forest health, you can do find a forester, you can do why does the Barnes Ranger never stop talking? You'll get answers to all those questions. Yard tree questions, that's not really a forester's forte. We can look at them, but there's so many different yard trees. You know, you planted an eastern yellow hibiscus in your yard and we're not really sure, right? So your local extension office is great for those. You can find this, you know, some arborists. If you're near a bigger town, not really any of those up in Douglas and well, I guess Superior. There's even urban foresters that are employed by the towns that deal with all that sort of stuff. So help's available. You can always contact CareRI and get a little assistance there. So next steps. So again, last time we said next steps. So your next steps this time. Once again, get out and walk your property, folks. You bought it to enjoy it, or you inherited it to enjoy it, or you hung on to it to enjoy it. So get out there and enjoy it and look for those forest health issues. You've probably already got some ideas. You're like, well, I notice a dead tree over here, but it's just a one-off tree. Or, wow, over here, there's 12 dead trees in my pine plantation. Or I'm growing toothpicks over here, you know, and the forest floor doesn't have any little trees coming up and it looks all dark underneath, you know, it might be a little bit thick. Especially up here, you guys, for Douglas and Bayfield County, balsam fir will get really thick up here to the point where it's dark and shadowy and spooky underneath, and that's just ripe for that spruce budworm. When those crowns are so tight together that a squirrel wouldn't have to stretch to run from one to the other on those balsam firs, you're talking about, you know, that spruce budworm gets in there and hey guys, I found all the food over here, and they just come in there. And then once you've gone and checked it out, and hopefully you're thinking about a forest management plan, it's time to call Kara or I for a walkthrough, or if you're ready for the next step and you hire a forester to help you with the management plan and look at that. And with that, we are on time and we have some time for questions. So what questions did you hold till the end to stump us?
Feel
That's
free
a
to
pun.
unmute,
Stump us. Yeah, unmute.
turn your cameras on, ask questions if you didn't get them answered, or if anything was posed in chat that you want to talk a little bit more about, feel free to bring that back up. We got plenty of time.
Tony, you look deep in thought.
I have a question.
Uh-huh.
Is it if my brother bought ash logs to cut up for firewood, and he has big stacks of them,
Mhm.
is that dangerous to have on the property?
Well, hopefully they weren't brought from too far away. We have some restrictions on well, like mostly with the gypsy moth now.
Can I get in there?
Yeah,
'Cause
go ahead. Help me
they
out.
hypothetically, those logs hypothetically could have been brought from far away, because emerald ash borer went so hog wild. There is a statewide quarantine, and I used to work in a log yard, and before we had that statewide quarantine, if ash came from a specific county, we had to mark it and process it before it stopped, before the insects would come out of the wood. So before it got warm enough for them to wake up and fly away. But now that there's a statewide quarantine, it's hypothetically possible that those logs could have been brought from further away. So find out where they're from. And my opinion, Andy, you can disagree, is that could be dangerous for your property. If they've already been there for a few years, they already woke up from the winter and said, this is a great new home, then the damage is done. But maybe they didn't have any emerald ash borer in them to start with. So
Yeah,
there's
that's
that.
that's a good point. I mean, if they've been laying there stacked up for 4 years, it's probably not a big deal. If they were cut from a county that had the emerald ash borer and they were cut this year, then maybe get them all cut and processed up before next spring when it warms up.
Okay.
Thanks, Kara. Saw something pop up in chat. Are there any, let's see, I think next is Linda. Are there any destructive pests for birch in Bayfield County? There are. Some have 2 legs and some have 6. We have the bronze birch borer here, which wasn't one of the ones we talked about tonight, but it looks a lot like those other borers, like the emerald ash borer or the 2-line chestnut borer. And in fact, you'll often mistake it. It's iridescent on its back, on its, it's called a carapace. I'm not an entomologist. So you'll think, oh, I found an emerald ash borer, and it's really a bronze birch borer. So I think that's probably the big one for birch, other than people going out and cutting birch poles, sometimes legally and sometimes not. Kara, can you think of any other ones?
The only other thing I can think of is the fact that in general, paper birch / white birch and yellow birch are on the decline because they're hard to regenerate. They have 2 different means of regeneration, or 2 different habitats they need. White birch needs a lot of disturbance and a lot of light. Yellow birch needs a little bit. And then they're delicious for a lot of our browsing forest friends.
Like you were going to say you thought they were delicious.
Well, they do have a sweet, the yellow birch does have a sweet taste. So there's another tree ID tip for you. Chew on them.
People do tap them. Okay, Linda, did that answer the question? We'll move on, and we'll trust her to holler if we didn't. John says top of basswood leaves are curled. It's gone on for many years. Are they just not getting enough water? That's one of those ones where I'd probably have to come out, John, and take a peek at it and see. Leaves doing things that don't look right is one of our first indicators, but it can be pretty hard to tell just from one description. Like Kara said, we look for a lot of different things. It could be that they're not getting enough water. It could be they're getting too much water. If it's gone on every year for many years, then I probably wouldn't sweat it too much. But yeah, we could definitely get some, one of us to come out and look at it.
And take lots of pictures alternately.
Yeah.
One
Yep.
landscape picture, let's see where it is. Is it next to your house, next to the driveway, in the middle of an opening? A picture of the leaf close up, picture of the area around the bowl near the root crown, and even pull out a hand lens and take a peek at some of those leaves. See if you see funky black dots, little wiggly insects, sometimes just a standard little kid hand lens to look closer at something will show you something that we would have overlooked.
Yep. And then we'll still want to come out because we like to come out and look at trees. Bill's our sleeper agent. He says, how do I know if my trees are too crowded? So usually I just ask them and they'll tell me. But this is where you, you know, foresters, we have a bunch of tools and charts and stuff. You know, you can ask Kara and I to come out and look, and we'll give you our opinion on if they're too crowded or not.
And
just some general things that I'm sorry, what, Kara?
Oh no, you're great. I won't interrupt you.
Some general stuff you can look at before we get out there. If you've got trees where the crown doesn't look like it's very much bigger than the bole, you know, that crown hasn't spread out at all. If you know you've got a full grown, you know, you've got a 10-inch diameter maple tree and it's got a 5-foot diameter crown up top, it might not be having enough room to spread out. If you're starting to see the trees look a little stressed, if you've got, you know, if they're conifers and it looks like you've got toothpicks, you know, they're 70 feet tall, but they're only 5 inches in diameter, and you know your grandpa planted them in 1910, they're probably too crowded. But it's an easy one for a forester to come out. We can tell you that in a matter of a couple of minutes. That's no sweat for us, whether you call Kara or I, or if, you know, you have a consultant forester out there.
Yeah, and we will be met like a true cruise. We'll be measuring the basal area. You'll have to look that term up, maybe. The basal area, the diameter, as well as assessing what Andy's talking about, like the crown to bole ratio. So anytime someone tells you something about your trees, they should be able to give you a few numbers that back it up.
And every species is going to be different for what sort of a density is healthy and what sort is not. What we're generally looking for is for the trees to capture that site and be fully utilizing it without becoming the sweet corn in the garden problem where you've got them compete with each other so much that they're getting stressed. All right, that was a good question. Are there any more? Everybody's like, no. So I don't want you to think that the end is near and all your trees are going to die and you should quick sell the land while the selling is good. You know, there's been forest here since the glacier left, and there'll be forest here afterwards when the next glacier comes. Some species are gonna take a hit. Some are gonna do better. So it's just a matter of, you know, maintaining that forest in a healthy manner and keeping an eye on it. You know, some things like oak wilt we can try to minimize. Some things like EAB, all we can do is kind of acknowledge it's coming and alter our plans from there. So if you have any questions, please get a hold of Kara. You've got our contact info. We love to come out and look at people's forest. It's what we do. And it's free for us to do it. So there's no reason not to have us out there and take a peek if you've got a question. With that, Lauren, I think we're there.
Yeah, that sounds good. If anybody thinks of anything down the road for Andy or Kara, I sent their contact information last week along with the recording, so please feel free to reach out to them. We will send another email with the recordings, and publications from this week were sent out this morning. So you should have plenty of information, like Andy said, to get you through the winter. And we look forward to seeing you next week. So thanks everybody for joining us.
All right. Next week, we're going to talk about berries and nuts and bowls and all sorts of good fun stuff. So don't miss that one. I was out eating service berries this afternoon. They're ripe and they're delicious. All right. Thanks a bunch, guys.
Go Bucks.